All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson. I'm with the University of Illinois at the State Water Survey, and we're here today to talk about what realtors need to know about their homes with well water. So I want to mention that the Water Survey hosts the private well class, which is funded by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and USEPA, and it's a 10-lesson program that people can sign up for, which I'll talk about a little later. The private well class is a 10-lesson class that you sign up for by email. It's sent to you once a week for 10 weeks, and it's free. And again, I'll talk about that more later, but these webinars are meant to support that. They're not the class. It's much more detailed and provides a lot more information. I just want to make sure that's clear. All right, so moving on. Again, today, this program is part of a national program funded by RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, to support private well owners and to promote source water protection. And the materials today follow our lessons to some degree, but they're also tailored today for what realtors need to know regarding basic private well issues. We are recording this, and it will be available on our YouTube page and on our videos page on privatewellclass.org. And a lot of you ask questions, which we'll also get to during our time today, but if a question comes up during something that I've said or one of us have said, and you have a question about something in one of the slides, you can use your chat box or question box on your GoToWebinar screen and ask that question. Katie Buckley, who's you just heard speaking, is keeping track of those, and we'll answer those at the end as time allows. Okay, so I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the Water Survey, and I'll be delivering the webinar today. Katie Buckley's also with us. She's the Water Resources Outreach Specialist here at the Water Survey with us. She put the handouts that you see on the GoToWebinar screen. If you click on your little handout button, you can see there's a worksheet for realtors and a CE attendance form. And if there are any sanitarians on you can talk to Katie about CEUs for those sorts of things. And we also have Dan Webb with us, who manages our public service lab, which in Illinois, we have a lab that does private well sampling for well owners in Illinois. Until 2006 or so, that was a free service for inorganics and metals, and now there's a fee associated with that just because of budget issues with the state. We're also not a certified lab. We're a university lab, and we use all the EPA methods and all those things, but because we don't have that certification, which I'll get to as one of the questions today, our results are more considered a screening, and they're not legally defensible, but again, a lot of good information that we use from the lab work that Dan and his folks do. So who is RCAP? If you've not heard of them, they're a group of 6 regional nonprofits that do a lot of work around the country in housing, water and wastewater infrastructure, and private wells. They have staff in every state. So each of these 6 regional affiliates are their own entity, and they're listed here on the right. And if you are interested in working with RCAP, they can do webinars for you and workshops for you. They can also go out and do assessments of a private well, an individual private well, and that's all part of our grant funding from USEPA. So they're the kind of the boots on the ground part of the program around the country. And we all work together, so I work with these folks hand in hand. And if you need more information about one of the RCAP groups and like for us to make contact for you or introduce you, just let us know. They are working in nearly every state, and that's our job, is kind of facilitate that connection to get you to a real person, so to speak. The Water Survey, for many of you who aren't aware, so every state has a state geological survey. Illinois also has a water survey. It's a sister agency. And we came about because of cholera and typhoid problems back around the turn of the century. So the Water Survey was formed to document the water quality of the waters of Illinois. We've been around since then. Like a geological survey, we do public service and outreach as well as applied research and provide service to the citizens of Illinois and our communities. So I'm in the groundwater section. We do a lot of work with communities that have wells, which is 95% of the communities in Illinois, to help them understand their resource, what their water quality issues are, things like that. And as evidence kind of our history, this is in our files for the city of Pana, Illinois. April 16th to May 9th, 1916, they had a typhoid outbreak. And as the water survey staff identified where those occurrences were and looked at the issues, they basically figured out that it was the Pana Ice Cream Company, which is the arrows there in the middle of this diagram, where all the typhoid was originating from. So, pretty cool stuff. And though our role has changed, it's not just public health per se. That's what our Illinois Department of Public Health does these days. We've been around for a long time, and we've have resources going back well over 100 years on a lot of the water quality issues and water quantity issues in the state of Illinois. So today, what we're going to talk about really is what's important to home buyers and sellers. And what we tried to do, or what I tried to do with this, is look at this from both perspectives. If you're the buyer or you're the seller, what you should know, what your realtor should be able to tell you, and what your realtor should do in advance to make this process better and to ensure we're protecting each other. And we're going into this assuming that, I did get a couple questions this time that were troubling, to be honest, asking about basically how to get around the rules, or if we had to follow the rules. And, to me, realtors are licensed. They're professionals. That should never be a question. Whether you're buying or selling a home, you should be trying to make sure that the people who are either selling or buying are their public health protected, that they're doing what they need to do to ensure that, someone's not going to get sick or hurt because of the well water. And it's, instead of a detriment, it's, one of the reasons why you'd want to buy a home. Believe it or not, I know a lot of people, and there's a lot of bad press about private wells, but in most cases, private wells are perfectly safe as long as they're maintained, as long as you test to ensure that that safety is really there. And so we're going to go through a lot of these issues. So important points to remember about private wells. I grew up on an old hand-dug well, so we had to take care of everything ourselves. But private wells aren't regulated, so it's really up to the owner to make sure their water's safe and the system's maintained. You can't go by taste or odor or color. Some things that have no odor, color, or taste can be in a naturally occurring groundwater, like arsenic. You can't taste it, you can't see it, but it's there. So that's why you need to test regularly. And the difference between a private well and somebody on a public water supply or community water supply like I am today is that I pay $40 to $50 a month to the community water supply, and that cost from all the residents is spread out for sampling, maintenance, having a licensed water operator, and fixing all the infrastructure so that I turn on my tap at my house and I have water pressure. You have to do that yourself if you're a private well owner, and that's the message well owners need to understand if they're going to buy a home with a well. And, a lot of people prefer that. So buying a home in a rural area with a well is a lot of times very attractive. So you need to make sure your client understands the issues that come with owning a well. As I mentioned, a lot of wells were installed before the current well construction code in a given state. In Illinois, we passed a law in 1968 requiring wells to be permitted and a construction log be filed with the state. In New York, that wasn't until 2000. And in Mississippi, they still have, their law says that if it's less than 6-inch diameter, you don't have to file a log with the state. So a lot of older wells, they've always been grandfathered in, so they may have poor construction or not safe construction that allow surface influences to get into the well. And you need to understand those things in advance, because if it comes up during the property sale, if I'm a buyer, I am going to check all that stuff out, and I'm going to make sure that it's all taken care of and that the well is safe and all those things. And it could reduce the value of your home, and that's a hard lesson to learn at the very end when you could have fixed it in the first place. So, and on the buyer side, it's buyer beware. Not only for public health protection for their family, but also for property values. You don't want to buy a property and find out that it's contaminated, or the well has to be redone, or you're going to add treatment that's going to cost $2,000 or $3,000 a year. Until you need to know that in advance. So, the one message here is, our class that we have walks you through all the basic issues related to well owners. Differences in wells. A bedrock well is different than a sand and gravel well, is different than a large diameter bored well, and you need to understand what you're dealing with all those things. And it's worth your time as a realtor, especially if you deal with a lot of properties with private wells, to know those differences. So here's whether you represent the buyer or the seller, you need to do an inspection of the well and water system, or have someone who is an expert do that. You should test the water, and you need to make sure you inform your client and be informed about what those findings are. If if it's an old dug well, and I'm going to show you some really horrific examples in a little bit, that needs to be stressed and dealt with before you put the property up for sale. And more private well issues are coming to light, and it's becoming more of a quote hot topic. And so you're going to find fewer and fewer well owners who are uninformed, or well owners, buyers who are uninformed and not asking about their water supply. So a little bit about wells. I mentioned that there's differences. So this is a drill rig that's putting in a bored well. You can see the bucket there that's 3-foot diameter circle that's dropping the dirt there. So they're putting in a large diameter well, which is usually a 3-foot concrete tile, 3-foot diameter tile that's placed vertically in the well with 4-foot sections. And the seams between those sections are where the water can seep in. Usually don't put these in unless you don't have an aquifer. So they're typically shallow, and they're using water from the shallow water table. That's water that comes from the surface and infiltrates in the ground. So depending on how deep the water table is, those waters are typically more at risk of having surface contaminants with them. And so what we find is that bored or dug wells tend to be higher in things like nitrate or other surface contaminants. And so it's, again, if you have a bored or a dug well, it's just a matter of sampling and ensuring that it's sealed at the surface properly so that things can't get in. These are 3 examples of dug and bored wells. The one on the upper left is an old hand dug well. It's worst case. It's a great example to show worst case here. It's on a sloped hill. You can see all the mud on the left or on the right side of it. That's because this is in a cattle pasture. Those posts are worn down because the cattle come up to that and rub. It's covered by, it's probably 5 or 6 foot diameter. It's covered by 2x4 or 2x6s and 2x8s with tin over top of that, and then some concrete blocks holding the whole thing down. Snakes get into this, rats. Sometimes if one of those boards is slid down, even something larger can fall in, let alone it's getting water from the shallow water table. And so the cattle are there, and everything they do is sitting in there, and every time it rains, it's seeping into the ground. It looks like that could be a cropped field up slope on the hillside. It could have corn or soybeans different years, and so nitrates applied, ag chemicals might be supplied. I'd be really surprised if this well could pass a water quality test. And, honestly, the folks that live here up over the hill, they may have been drinking that water their whole lives, and they're used to it, but the rest of us aren't. The other 2 examples are bored wells, which are proper construction today for a large diameter well where you need to put those in. The one on the right has the concrete tile coming all the way up to the surface, and then it has a concrete lid. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And the other one is also at the surface. It's only a 6-inch casing, so it looks like a drilled well, but that drilled casing only goes down 10 feet, and then it opens up into the 3-foot diameter well, and the cap is just 10 feet below ground. And that's an alternate practice for installing these wells, because then you're able to fill that large void, the 3-foot diameter void that you've created near the surface, with more clayey or concrete type material that won't let water seep in around the well right at the surface. Where the one on the right here with the tile coming all the way to the surface, the concrete 3-foot cylinder, something gets spilled near there. If there's not a seal around this well at the upper seam, if we assume that tile is sticking up a foot, that means 3 feet below land surface there's a seam where 2 pieces of tile are sitting on top of each other, and water can seep in at 3 feet. And that's not much protection from anything that might be spilled on the ground surface. So here's those 2 examples. The one on the left is where the concrete tile comes all the way up to the surface. You can see the horizontal lines every 4 feet. That's where the pieces of tile are set on top of each other, and they're not cemented together or anything. They're just sitting there. There's a ridge. There's a male and a female tab on the end of each of those, so they fit together. And the water table is down where the triangle is, and the rest of that is, the pumps down in the water where it belongs. And again, the reason you put these in is because it's mostly fine textured soil. It doesn't have a lot of sand in it, and there may be these thin sand lenses that are down at depth somewhere, if you're in glacial geology especially, where a little water can seep in. But the reason you have a 36-inch or in some cases larger diameter well is so that water can slowly seep in and you're capturing a volume of water. So when you pump this well, say in the morning, it may have 20 feet of water in it. You might pump out 10 feet of water as you take showers and get ready to go to work and all that stuff. But then during the day when no one's home, it slowly fills back up to where the water level is. And so it's meant to be, it's almost like a cistern in that it stores water so you have it when you need it. Because there's not a good aquifer that'll continuously provide water to a well. And then the one on the right is the other construction where it looks like a drilled well at the surface. It's got a 6-inch, or there's a 4-inch casing in this example. But 10 feet or so below land surface, it opens up into the larger diameter well, where again, so it can hold storage and your pumps down there. And this allows you to have a pitless, like a drilled well would have if you're in a colder climate. And so that you don't have to worry about freezing or have a pit for your well, which is also a safety hazard. So as far as drilled wells go, there's really 2 types. You either drill a well and finish it in sand and gravel, or you drill a well and you finish it in bedrock. So a sand and gravel well, you don't want to pump sand, so you use a screen. That's what this picture is. It's a fine slotted screen that goes on the bottom of the well, and it's where the water comes in. And you size the gaps in those woven pieces of stainless steel so that it keeps the sand out but lets the water through. So the more coarse gravel you have for your aquifer down at depth at the bottom of the well, the wider those gaps can be, and a lot of times they're very fine, hundredths of a millimeter. So as an example, if you have a 200-foot well that's in sand and gravel, typically the screen would only be the bottom, say 5 feet. So in that case, water's only coming in the well from 195 to 200 feet below land surface. And the reason that's important is it means the upper 195 feet is all solid pipe, could be PVC or steel, but water can't get in the well anywhere near the surface as long as the casing was installed properly and it's properly sealed as you go down, which you expect from a well-constructed water well. And here's what that looks like. The screen, this is actually a poor example, and I need to change this. For one, you don't put the pump down in the screen, and because it causes too much velocity around the well screen, and it can induce sand getting in the well. And so usually the pump is set up somewhere above the screen so that the velocity is lower coming through the well screen, and it doesn't cause problems with sand or fine sand coming into your well, because that's hard on the pump and everything else. But so you have a pump that's submersible, water's coming in down at the well screen, and then you have a discharge line that shows up here, which is equivalent to your pitless adapter, so that it goes into the house below the frost line. The water level in this will be somewhere above the screen and maybe even above the aquifer. So the blue here with the dots is the aquifer. The gray that's above that with the lines is kind of a clay layer or a shale layer, and clay layer, it wouldn't be shale. And water pressure could cause water to rise up above the top of the aquifer, but it's obviously below the top of the well in this case. So the point really I'm making here is that water is only coming in the well screen. And that's different from a bedrock well. And this is an example of a bedrock well. So typically when you put in a well in bedrock, you only use casing to 10 or 20 feet into the bedrock, as it shows on this diagram on the right side of the diagram. And that's because, rock doesn't transmit water. In a sand and gravel aquifer, water's flowing between the grains of sand. The porosity of the sand is as much as 30%, which means the airspace between the grains is 30%. So if you have 100 feet of sand, you can have 30 feet of that as water if it's all full. In bedrock, water is not flowing through the rock itself. It's flowing through cracks and fissures in the rock, which are these blue lines that are on the diagram. So to take advantage of those and to make sure that you're hitting fractures so that you'll have water in your well, you don't use casing through the entire length of the well bore. You only put casing down maybe 20 feet into the rock to seed it and have a stable well casing at the surface, and below that, the rock itself acts as the well casing. You drill a hole through rock, you've got a hole in the rock that works just like that, and then every time you encounter a fracture, the water in that fracture is available to the well and to your pump. So that's the big difference between a bedrock well and a sand and gravel well. If this were in an area where bedrock were only 40 feet below land surface, a 200-foot well might only have 50 or 60 feet of casing, and the rest of it's an open hole. There's places, I visited New York a few years ago, bedrock's right at the surface. There are wells that are 400 feet deep there that only have 25 feet of casing or 20 feet of casing. And what that means, without that overburden and all that protection for the well, a lot shallower water can get in the well. So in this case, if you look at the way these fractures run to the upper left and upper right, if the overburden here that's listed wasn't really there, those fractures could run all the way up to the surface somewhere, which means there's a direct conduit to your well from the surface. And so the one issue with a bedrock well, you need to understand the geology around you. Does bedrock come to the surface? Is it buried under 60 feet of overburden? All those things matter because it matters where your water might be coming from. And it can also be coming from farther away. If you're in a type of bedrock that's really doesn't have many fractures, it's very tight, like granite, the porosity overall may only be 1% to 2%, which means if you take the entire volume of rock around a given area of the well, only 1% to 2% of that is fractures versus the 30% you have in sand and gravel. So one fracture could be contributing all the water to your well, and that fracture could run for miles away. And so it's really important to understand the geology wherever your well is, what type of well you have, and how that might influence your water quality. So the bottom line is well type certainly matters. Dug or bored wells are typically put in where there's no real aquifer, or a lot of cases very old. The well I grew up on, my grandpa had dug in 1933. He put it in a ravine because he knew there'd be water there, but that's a bad place. Surface water could run right to our well. When it rained hard, we had muddy water, so it wasn't protective at all from surface contamination. But and so a lot of, if my grandpa would have known, or he would have had access to a drill rig in 1933, he could have drilled down 140 feet and hit a sand and gravel aquifer. But we did not know that then. So versus a drilled or driven well in sand and gravel, which I already mentioned, and consolidated rock, which is bedrock, and there's various types. So it really matters. Try to find a log. What I tell well owners, some drillers really hold on to their logs and don't want to share them because of the competition and things like that, but you should get a hold of a well log. And if you're drilling a well, we tell well owners to make it part of the contract with the driller that you get a copy of the log and all the information about the type of casing, how it was constructed, all of those details, because you need to keep them in your records and they should stay with the home and the property. So it's really important to know those. So you can have a qualified person. Even you can take that information to someone at your state geological survey and ask them, what's this mean? what issues might we have, and that's free advice, and they'll help you understand that stuff. So the other thing about well construction is I mentioned a lot of wells were constructed before the current well construction code, and in fact we have 2 states that still don't have well construction code, so there's no law requiring wells to meet a certain criteria in how they're constructed, and that's Alaska and Pennsylvania. But in most states there are codes, but a lot of them, as I said, are newer or less than 25 or 30 years old, and so there's a lot of wells that were put in prior to that. And I know even in Illinois, where we have one of the earlier laws that required a well permit and a construction permit and also a log to be filed, we probably only have maybe half of the well logs on file that there are actually wells out there in Illinois. We have about 500,000 well logs in our files. We're the repository for the state for those. And, we find a lot of wells when we're doing different kinds of field studies where there's a private well that we don't have on file. So the problem is then also if you do put in a new drilled well, there's probably an old dug well on the property, and some people want to keep those for irrigating their garden or whatever, but sometimes people don't even know they're there, and they provide they're really a risk, safety hazard, and a health hazard for contaminating the groundwater. And here's 2 examples, and I think I showed this slide twice, and I apologize, the one on the right. The one on the left here, they just had a piece of plywood. It's this well was installed a long time ago. It's corrugated pipe, corrugated tile, and you can see the pump here at the surface, so it's shallow, and a woman probably walked over that piece of plywood 1,000 times, and this time when she did, it broke, and it killed her. And so the Washington State Department of Ecology is the organization, the state agency in Washington State that regulates well construction and well drillers, and they have a blog, and I got this off their blog. But you can see this is a little well house. There's a funnel sitting there. There's a hole over the in the plywood where that concrete block was to keep it. But anything, mice, whatever, you can see all the insulation that's on the sides, and there's an old broom there. Who knows what's fallen in this well, and this is what their drinking water supply was. And the picture on the left, or on the right here, that's a dead goat. It fell into an old well, and no one knew it for a long time. It's just, it's a poor situation. It's not protected at the surface. So what do you do if you're working with a property that has any of these wells, especially if it's an old abandoned well that's not being used, which that's one of the questions today I get to at the end. You should seal it. But if not, if it's a well that's actually going to be in use, you need to bring it up to code if you can. Make sure it's sealed properly at the surface so things can't get in, and it needs to be safe. So if it's got a well pit, for instance, fill that in, bring it up to the surface, use a pitless adapter. Well pits are also dangerous. We did a study in 9 townships in Illinois. We found 1,708 wells. We went door to door. And at least 40 or 50 of those homes had pits still, old pit wells. And, they flood when it rains, unless the seals on your well cap are maintained so that those rubber seals haven't become brittle and cracked. If they're not really watertight, then whenever that happens, you're going to have water seeping in your well from your well cap that's not safe and not healthy. So, if you're not sure what to do, you can talk to your well authority, county, or contractor and figure out what needs to be done to make that safe before you try to sell a property. Same about abandoned wells. And, like I said, a lot of states didn't require logs until at least the 60s to 80s. And so there's also a lot of well pits. And the bottom line is, if you have an abandoned well, it's a liability on a property. So you need to fill it in and have it done properly. If not, a lot of things can happen. Someone gets hurt or it contaminates the aquifer, you could be liable as the property owner. And so just some examples here. And, again, the 2 pictures are from the Washington State Department of Ecology. A horse fell in an old well, and this Shelton, Washington man fell. He was fine in the end, which is amazing. but he must have fell into water, and it dampened his fall, so to speak. But the newspaper clippings on the right are all three of those are from Illinois, and the third one down is actually from Texas when Jessica McClure, those of you that are old enough to remember, in the 90s, Jessica McClure was a little girl who fell into a well. CNN covered it live for 18 hours, and the whole nation got to watch as they tried to dig her out. And she sang songs and all those things, and they were able to successfully get her out of there, and she wasn't hurt severely anyway. But the other three are all newspaper clippings from Illinois. From I think they're all from '97 actually. And back in those days, we didn't have everyone on the internet and sharing information, and so the folks in Sangamon County at the bottom one didn't know what happened in Galesburg or in Buffalo Grove, where other folks had gotten killed because they fell in an old abandoned well. It's not the same as it is today. So, this stuff, it happens more than people realize, and they're just a risk. Tractors, broken axles, livestock, horses, they're just, they need to be sealed. So whether you represent the buyer or the seller, do an inspection. As we mentioned before, it's the bottom line is if you're the seller, it may cost you some money in advance, but it's better to be prepared, and that way you can make corrections before listing it. Because if you run across the well owner or the home buyer that does do their due diligence, or their realtor that does their due diligence that represents the buyer, you're going to have to replace all that stuff anyway, and it's going to hold things up. And it's better to be prepared beforehand, make sure the well has been sampled, that if there's any corrections that need to be done. And, in some cases, there's naturally occurring contaminants. So where it says make sure treatment is in place is working, you may already have some kind of a device in place, an RO unit or a GAC filter for something, because there's naturally occurring arsenic, for instance. But as long as that's in place, and the buyer can be, assured that, we've sampled it since we've added this treatment, and it certainly does remove the arsenic. It's a matter of replacing this cartridge or, doing the proper maintenance on the RO unit in order to keep it working properly. And that's the message. So, and if you're the buyer, that's why you need to sample. You need to have someone come in and inspect the well if the seller hasn't, so that you're protecting your investment before you buy. This is from the state of Wisconsin, and they have actually one of the more practical laws, in my opinion, for people who are transferring a property. Their law says you don't have to have an inspection. Inspections are voluntary, and you're not required to bring it in compliance if there's an inspection shows anything. But if you do an inspection, you have to use this form, and you have to use a licensed contractor to do it. And the point of that is they're ensuring that if you're going to the trouble of making sure that of checking the well out, it's done properly, not by someone who's not really intelligent on well issues or doesn't have a license as a contractor, and that it's dealing with all the right things. And really what this form does is it looks at what the current construction code is in Wisconsin and asks if there's anything that's deficient from that code. And a lot of wells will have some deficiency just because they were installed before the current code was in place. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a deal breaker. It could be that, their code today says a well has to be 18 inches above grade land surface, and you run across a well that's only 12 inches above grade. Well, you can use that information to say, okay, well, this isn't on a high spot. There's no chance of it ever flooding. So that's what the 12 inches or 18 inches is for, is to make sure the well doesn't get flooded. So there's really no risk here. And so it really depends, but then that contractor can also go through that with you and make sure that it's done properly. So, again, the state doesn't even want a copy of this, which is awesome. They want to make sure they're protecting folks who, if they're going to have their well inspected, it needs to be done right, and so that you really know what you're getting. So I think this is, it's a model to me for the country on what should be done related to inspecting a well during a property transfer. And this is the bottom of that page. It talks about some of the issues there, and I don't know all the rules in Wisconsin. I am in Illinois, but you can, there's a place there for all these. And it is, again, it's a really practical approach to this, I think, that doesn't get the state overly involved, but it also does protect the citizens of the state, which is their job. This is from Minnesota Department of Health, and I use this slide in almost every presentation just to give people an idea of all the things that can be considered an influence to a well. So a lot of people don't realize some of the things, for instance, for a lake, pond, or stream. I had a guy in New York call me and say, hey, I have a filter, and I had the stuff in it, and I analyzed it, and it was algae. Can I have algae in my well? And, algae needs sunlight to grow. So you're not going to find algae in a groundwater well. And so I started asking questions, and it turns out it's his cabin at a lake house where the well is in bedrock about 15 feet from the shore of the lake. So, really simple solution there in the end. He's pulling water from the lake, his well is, because of a connection to the groundwater from the lake. So, there's reasons for those setbacks. This is the top half. These are all things that can cause contamination or be a conduit to your well. And again, here's the bottom side of that. And some of these are practical, like an electric line or having it 3 feet from a building. You never know when you're going to need to get into your well, especially if you have a submersible pump. I've run across wells that are in a basement, or someone has cut their well off below grade because they have a pitless, and they've decided that's the best place for their garage, and they put 6 inches of concrete over the entire thing, not having the sense to realize that if their pump ever fails, there's no way for them to get to that. And so some of these are just for accessibility, but they're all things to take into account. You shouldn't tie your dog to your wellhead, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. So your dog is obviously going to the bathroom there, and depending on the type of well and the type of soil, some of that can run off. Or possibly if your well casing, when you drill a well, if you're going to put in a 6-inch diameter well, you drill nearly an 8-inch hole so that you have room to fit the well in, and then you fill that in with grout if it's following code, depending on the state, all those things. Well, if that seal isn't properly done, or it's for some reason the grout hasn't stayed in place, which can happen, now the area around your well, that inch diameter around between the boring and the well casing is a conduit for water to go straight down towards your screen or down to the bottom of your well. And so it's really important to protect the area around your well. And I don't know if I went backwards or not. What I do here? No, I must have put this up for a reason. And again, I think this is a good document to use no matter where you're at. Not everything will fit, but it's got everything on it. So it's a good way to understand if a well meets the right criteria. So also test your water. I mentioned earlier. If you test it, if you're the seller, you should test it beforehand. It can actually be a selling point. You might not think so or agree, but if you already know you have something in your water and you can identify that and it's treatable and you can provide that stuff in advance, it's a much better situation than finding out you have to add treatment and it becomes part of a negotiation where all of a sudden the value of your property just went down thousands of dollars because the buyer's got leverage. And also some states have laws now, and some counties do, on testing at property sale. In New Jersey, Rhode Island, a few others, and a lot of counties. There's counties in New York and a few other places, Massachusetts. But also lenders require it. FHA, a lot of banks won't give a loan unless it's been tested and meets certain criteria. So it's just worth doing and doing the right way in advance. Why it's important. So, one example I don't want to know. So in Illinois, we have a law that says you have to fill out a form when you are selling a home. And one of the questions on there is, do you know anything adverse basically about your well or your well water? So I was doing a bunch of arsenic research in a rural area where we were sampling private wells, and I came across a gentleman who said, you can sample my well as long as you don't send me the results and you do it when I'm not home. And so in talking to him, I found out it's because he was selling his home and he wanted to be able to honestly answer that question on that form that said, I don't know of anything adverse about my well, even though he was in an area we know to be high in arsenic. That's one example. The other, buyer beware. So in another instance in Illinois that I've come across, I had a person contact me from a different county where their county basically said, if you sample for nitrate and coliform, that's really all we require. And so this person bought this home. It came back okay for coliform and nitrate. And about 2 years later, she decided to sample it for more things. And it came back with arsenic at 150 ppb, which the health standard for arsenic for a community water supply is 10 parts per billion, or ppb. And so hers was 15 times that. And she had 3 kids, and she was mad, and she wanted to know why the state wasn't doing more to protect her. And that's, comes back to buyer beware. A lot of states will never pass laws that make it restrictive or require you to sell, to test when there's a property transfer or for anything like that. Wells sometimes in some states are tested when they're first constructed, and that's it. After that, you're on your own. So, the message as a realtor has to be everyone should test and everyone should protect themselves, both buyer and seller. Just because if you buy a home and it turns out to have arsenic in it, if that buyer can prove that the seller knew it, they're going to be liable. And we've seen cases of that here in Illinois where they had to go back and there was a lawsuit, and the seller had to go back and retrofit a home or had to take care of the problem. So what do you test for? So the way we look at this is, it's really different everywhere because there's different geology, there's different types of wells. If you're in a really deep geologic formation, you might have naturally occurring arsenic or radium or something else. But if it's a properly constructed well, you're not going to have a lot of surface influence. And so it matters, so we have a list of things I'll provide you in a second. But we also say you need to talk to your county or state health department or your local health department and ask them, is there anything naturally occurring here? I know we had several questions this time about radon, and I'm going to answer that in the question part of the webinar today. But if you're in an area that has granite bedrock aquifers, or the sand and gravel aquifers are made up of granite-based rock, then you need to be concerned with that, and it can be in the water. And so it really matters where you're at, and I'll show you a few examples in a minute. But again, your lender may have requirements, and what we've tried to tell folks, this is a national program, is you need to look locally at some of those things. There's certainly a suite of things that everyone should test for, but you also need to look at local conditions, and I'll show you some examples of why in a minute. Natural groundwater quality, I guarantee you there's a state agency in your state that knows if there's naturally occurring arsenic or radium or some other contaminant, because of all the work that's been done by the USGS and the State Geological Survey and your DNR, Department of Environmental Quality, whatever the group might be. They have an idea of what's naturally occurring in your state. And so those are a good place to start as your natural resource agency. In Wisconsin, it's DNR. In Illinois, you have several choices, the Water Survey or your Department of Public Health, or state EPA. But we should be we collect a lot of water quality samples here because of our lab and Dan's lab. And so when a well owner calls me, I can look into our database and say, in this area, we know it's hard water, there's a lot of iron, you might have this issue, you might have that issue, and we can give them a bunch of information. But there's also now, you can even find information online, depending on the state. Some have great resources. Some at least have, some resources. So knowing that gives you an idea of what you should test for that's beyond, a given standard list, or where some folks may only require nitrate and coliform testing, and a lot of people, especially homeowners, will assume that means they're well safe. Testing for coliform and nitrate doesn't ensure your well is really safe. You need to test for a lot of other things. Okay, so as examples, Massachusetts DEP has this website. You can type in your address, and it'll tell you if you have a bedrock well, whether you're at risk for arsenic or uranium contamination in your well, which is naturally occurring. Nobody's fault. It's just there. It's in the matrix of the ground. Wow, I must have pulled this from something else because now they're auto-forwarding. This is Rhode Island, and the little dots that are all over the place here are where there used to be orchards. I'm going back. Sorry about that. And so these orchards, they use a lot of arsenic, so there's a lot of soil contamination that's already been identified. Whether that translates to groundwater contamination or not isn't clear, but if you're in one of those areas, and remember Rhode Island's only 30 miles by 15 or 20 miles, I believe, so this is a pretty small area. But the big splotch in the middle is the one I'm really showing this for. Rhode Island has naturally occurring beryllium, and you know, until I found this on their website a number of years ago, I didn't even realize beryllium was a regulated contaminant. But if you look on EPA's website, it is. It has health effects. It's a risk, a health risk. And if you're in Rhode Island in one of these areas, you should test for beryllium. And that's probably advice I'd give to no one else in the country. Nowhere else in the country have I seen that issue, though I haven't really investigated it either. But it goes back to the point of you just never know. So you need to talk to the appropriate state agency or county agency, and they can, or local health department, and they can provide you that information. Because I get, just like in Illinois, I know what counties have arsenic, naturally occurring arsenic, but I guarantee you those county health departments also know. And if you called them up, they would say, oh yeah, you need to test through the entire county, or this side of the county where it's this particular sand and gravel is known to have arsenic, those sorts of things. So you just need to ask, and you can find out a lot of information. And Wisconsin has developed this GIS-based tool that's online. It's awesome. You know, it takes the private well samples they have through their state DNR, and this was actually put together by University of Stevens Point for them. I apologize. I must have put an old slide in here and not realized that had a timer on it. But what this shows, I looked at arsenic by county, and so it's showing you county by county where what the arsenic levels are. All the green is 5 or less ppb, and then it goes up from there. The red ones means the average sample is over 20. And the counties that are clear are the ones where they had no sample results to use. But it's a good way, if I'm going to move into one of those areas like near Green Bay, I know that I'm going to sample for arsenic before I buy a home there, because it's, you know, they're just, it's an area that has arsenic in their groundwater. So more states are trying to develop these things. I haven't looked recently to see if anyone else has something this nice, but yeah, it's a great tool, and really all this information should be public, at least at some scale, to give buyers an opportunity to understand what might be going on. So yeah, so here's what we suggest. We suggest sampling for coliform and nitrate annually, like everyone else does. And you know, the point of those two sampling constituents isn't that they're necessarily a risk. Coliform is an indicator. E. coli is the one that's harmful. And nitrate, you know, is harmful for babies and pregnant women, but it isn't necessarily that harmful for adults, although there's new research that suggests there might be some links to certain types of health risks. But the verdict is still out on that. But the reason you test for these two things is because they're so ubiquitous in the surface that if it's high in your well, it indicates there's probably a pathway into your well from the surface. And that could be from a feedlot, it could be from a septic system. You know, going back to those dug and bored wells I showed earlier, if there's a little thin sand lens that's at 25 feet and it's only 3 inches thick, that is going to provide a lot of water from pretty far away. If your septic is even 200 feet away on the other side of the house, but that water manages to get into that 3-inch sand seam, your well may be pulling it right over. And so, and the way, you know, that's bad luck in my opinion, but it can happen. And when you have a coliform hit or a high nitrate, especially a coliform hit, you know, you can disinfect your well. But if it keeps coming back, that suggests there's a source. So it means either your well's not properly protected at the surface, or there's something in the ground that is causing a connection. So that's why you sample annually, though, because it gives you confidence that your well is properly sealed and that there aren't any sources nearby that are influencing your well from the surface. And then the other things here are just what we recommend. It's kind of a generic list, but it gives you a good idea, especially like cadmium and zinc if you have galvanized piping, or copper. If you have copper showing up in your samples, that may mean your water's a little corrosive, and so your copper pipes are leaching copper. The same with lead. If you have an older home, especially in the country, it may have lead pipes or lead solder, and galvanized pipe has lead in it. So those are just things to protect you. Lead isn't typically a well problem. It's typically a home plumbing problem, but it still needs to be dealt with, depending on the water quality of the groundwater, whether it might leach that or not out of the piping. So again, get advice from your local or state health department on local constituents of concern as well. But this gives you a good overview of what might be happening. And for things like arsenic, I sample a lot of wells, both private wells and wells that we put in to monitor water quality around the state. And what I know, especially about deeper groundwater wells that are more than 100 feet deep, is the arsenic is naturally occurring. It's there. If I go back every 10 years and sample one of my monitoring wells, the arsenic's almost identical in value. It's within 5 or 10% of every time. It doesn't change that much. There's a source. Water's moving slowly through the system. It's basically undisturbed, and it's just the way things are. And where you have variability, or when there are surface influences, or there's a lot of turnover of the water, so to speak, because of recharge or discharge that are getting into the geologic unit where you're pulling your water from. Inform your client and be informed. Provide resources as a realtor. There's a lot of resources out there. Even consider developing a web page if you do a lot of work. It makes you the expert. The more you learn, the more it's going to help your business. When you really understand the issues in your area, and they are different in every other area, you can't learn about one part of the country and then go to another one and expect to all of a sudden have all the answers, because it's just not going to happen. There's different issues. And, take our class, send your clients to our class. I guarantee you'll benefit from taking it, and it's all free. So, if you're representing the buyer, insist on an inspection and sampling, even if it's not required, because it far outweighs the cost of adding treatment or finding out that your property values are going to go down because something's been identified in the area that no one had dealt with before. So this is just some examples. Illinois Department of Public Health has a web page. Here's Wisconsin DNRs, and information that can help you learn more about the rules and regs, and just things about wells and pumps and all that stuff. And then, there are some folks out there, and I'm not trying to promote any given realtor, but the Colorado Springs area, they found all these videos. They're from different sources, and they put them all together so that, as a homeowner, I can go on their website and see some of that information. It's really not a bad idea, depending on the information you put up there. But because you also have to be sure you vetted that and it's from a reputable source and some of those things. So a little bit about the private well class. So it's 10 lessons that I mentioned. It's privatewellclass.org. These webinars provide more specific information on one given topic, but the 10 lessons together are a lot more information and detail than we could do here in an hour and a half. We also have provided a lot of multimedia lessons, which I'll show some examples of, videos, podcasts, and these webinars are recorded so that people can go back and see them. And again, it's all free. So the lessons cover everything from the hydrologic cycle and how water flows into a well and gets into a well, to the different types of well construction, which I covered today, and all the way to how pumps work and what happens if my, common problems. What if my pump is kicking on and off? What if I don't have enough pressure? To testing and sample results and what to do there, and how different kinds of treatment processes like RO work. And so there's a lot of good information there and a lot of resources. If you go to privatewellclass.org, this is what you see. This is the front page. You click on Learn by Email on the bottom left here, and it takes you to a page where you can sign up for the class as a homeowner or a well owner. Just your email address, first name, and then we ask where you live. It's by state, and that's really because our grant from EPA is meant to be national in scope, and it allows us to track that we're really reaching people in all 50 states, which we are, plus 11 or 12 countries or so. And so we've had over 6,000 people take our class so far, which is great, but there's 17 million private wells in the country. So it's really just a drop in the bucket so far. The entire class is available in Spanish. So if you work with any native Spanish-speaking folks, there are a lot of Spanish-speaking well owners in different parts of the country. And so we were fortunate to work with some folks on campus who are native Spanish speakers, and they developed this for us. And they've actually translated the entire set of lessons. So this is from lesson 1, showing the hydrologic cycle at the top, and that's a diagram from the Minnesota Department of Health that we then translated into Spanish. And the same here, showing how water flows through the pores in the rock and the sand and gravel, and what porosity and some of the common terms are. And that's all part of lesson 1. And again, all 10 lessons are available that way. Along with each lesson, like this lesson 1 is called the Science of Groundwater. There's extra resources on our resource library page, and all of these are from other sources, the USGS, Cornell University, different organizations that have put out material that we feel is useful to you as someone who's trying to learn more about wells. And so you can look at all of those resources as well. And maybe the way the lessons are written don't resonate with you. I guarantee you one of these will. So yeah, it's just a lot of additional material that will help you understand those things. We do webinars every month, like the one today. We did one in August, and I actually meant to put the other slide up, and I didn't. We did one in August of 2018. That's on what well owners need to know about lead. We obviously had done this 2 years ago, so we updated it and did another one just a couple months ago. And you can watch that on our website. If you go to webinars and events, past webinars, they show up on this videos page. And there's a lot of good information. And you'll see as we get through this, we answer a lot of your questions at the end. So every webinar is different, at least the second half, because we're answering the questions for that month, so to speak. We created a resource page for lead to provide a bunch of additional information on what CDC and EPA and some of the regulatory organizations tell us about lead in households. Again, it's mostly a premise plumbing problem, but there are areas where lead naturally occurs, which is pretty limited in the country. We've created some of our own videos, these training videos. It says there's 16 of them. What I should know about a shared private well. It's a lot bigger issue than people realize. If it's not in the deed, you may be buying a house that's on a shared well with 3 other homes, and the well's not on your property, it's on somebody else's. That may work out great as long as that landowner that owns the well or has the well has agreed to share that, and you all share expenses. But if he sells it to somebody else, they may not be so nice, or there may be no recourse. If there's a problem like a pump fails, they may, somebody may refuse to help pay for it. It just causes a lot of issues. So if you run across a well that's shared on property, I would make sure there's a contractual agreement with the person who has the well legally owning it before you buy the property if you're going to use their well, because it's a risk. You may end up having to drill your own, or maybe there's not enough water for your own, or if it's in some of the prior appropriation states, you may not be allowed to drill another well. And so it's a lot bigger issue than most folks realize. And I'm sure many of you have ran across that in the past because it's pretty common. How does my private well system work? Things like that are just 4 to 6 minutes long. They're basic information. We have one called How Does My Pressure Tank Work? It's had over 200,000 hits in 2 years, less than 2 years. And that's because a lot of people have pressure problems and don't understand how their pressure tank works. And this in 6 minutes explains what the top end and low end pressure settings are, how to, if you're having your pump kick on and off, what's probably the cause, things like that. We also do podcasts. Now, there's only 3 of the lessons that we've done the podcast for. They're actually a lot of work, but we've also done some radio spots for RFD Illinois through the Farm Bureau, and they've given us those recordings to use. And so, we've had over 3,000 downloads of our podcast, which is tells me that there's people who actually prefer to learn that way. As far as partner resources, which, as realtors, we would consider you our partners in this, you can get our newsletter. It comes out once a month. If you go to under Resource Library, there's a partner page. You just sign up for it. It'll send you this. This is one of our newsletters. It's a video on how to abandon a well. This is an old dug well that's right next to a house where they have city water now. And, we try to bring up issues like National Groundwater Awareness Week and different things that are going on, new materials that have been developed that you could use with well owners, things like that. On that last page where you sign up for the newsletter, if you scroll down the page, you get to this place where it says Newsletter Archive. You can see all of the newsletters. So you can take a look and decide if you think they're useful. If so, sign up. Again, it's free. And then we've also developed this flyer. It's in English and Spanish. And basically, it's a trifold that you can hand to people. There's a space between private well class and RCAP there that's in dark blue that doesn't have anything. We left that there on purpose so you can put your own label. And so we're glad to provide these free of charge to anyone who'd like them. If we get a lot of requests, we've already had requests for over 46,000 of these, and we've done 2 printings. Depending on the requests we get, might be a little while before we do another printing. But again, it's meant to be something you can hand out. And on the inside, it basically just says, get your water tested, follow these best practices, and the way you can learn more about your well is by taking our class. And it's meant to be a resource, and it's something that, again, you can hand out to all of your customers. And as I mentioned, it's in Spanish, and we also do have a realtors page, and so there's some information there. Usually, not a lot, honestly, but we need to. We certainly take recommendations on what you'd like to see here. That's not on the rest of our webpage that might benefit you. So. So the goal of all this, the entire program really is to give well owners information on why their well is important, why they should understand how it works, and what they can do to help protect themselves from risk. And that's a message we should all share. And so, we hope you'll promote what we're doing, as well as learn yourself more about private wells if you work with them very often. And so that's what I have for today for the regular part of the webinar. Is a little long because it's a lot of information to cover, but we got a lot of questions from you all, and so a couple things. We're going to answer some of those, but there must have been 70 or 80 questions at least, and we obviously can't answer all of those today. And so some of them we've already answered, just they were in part of the webinar material already, and some of them were kind of off base and not really what we deal with. So we're really looking at issues related to protecting well owners, their health, the drinking water, and how to maintain wells. Some of the other things may not be as much in our bandwidth. So if you asked a specific question about your state or the rules in your state, please just send us an email and we can look into it. But it's not something really to answer on this webinar. It's national in scope. There's people from all over the country, and we don't have time to talk about all 50 states today. So. And I want to remind you that if you go to the question or the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen, Katie's monitoring that as we speak. And if you have other questions, we'll pull those up at the end. We share Google Docs. She types them in. I pull them up. We can all see them. And Dan and I will try to answer those on the fly. So the first thing I want to talk about is testing, because there's a lot of questions about that and confusion. And we had a number of people ask about VHA and HUD and FHA loans. Well, VA and FHA follow the HUD rules. So as far as there are many different rules out there for states. So like in New Jersey, if I haven't mentioned it, they have a law that they passed nearly 20 years ago, probably has been more than 20 years ago, that requires testing at property sale. So does Rhode Island. And I believe there's a few other states that may have recently adopted those rules. And in Rhode Island, they've even gone beyond that. The way New Jersey's law works is the state has to take the sample, they give the results to the buyer and the seller, they have to work out who pays for that. And if there's somebody from New Jersey on the call, you may correct me if I make any mistakes here. But the bottom line is it goes to the buyer and seller and no one else can see it. You can't call the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and ask to see sample results for a well, a given well at this property. They won't give them to you. They produce maps that show where there's contaminants that are naturally occurring or on a larger scale so that people can see that information, but it's not at the property level. And Rhode Island goes one step further, and they've tied their sampling requirements for home sale to their building inspectors. And a building inspector has the authority to condemn a property as unlivable if the home has a contaminants over an MCL and nothing's done to remediate that. So the bottom line is, in Rhode Island, they're requiring you to fix anything as well. Either add treatment, find a new source, do whatever you need to make that property and that water safe to drink. And so the rules vary widely. There's one of the questions was about local ordinances. I'll get to that later, but there's a number of counties or local jurisdictions that have created their own rules that either follow the EPA MCLs or some of those things. But it's left up a lot of times to the local jurisdictions, and the problem with that is, like in Massachusetts, there's 380 some health districts. Everyone can set their own rules. So you could literally move to another town or even across the street, and all of a sudden the requirements for what you have to do for testing your well are totally different than they were from where you just left. And so there's no standardization, and there's a lot of folks looking into that issue now. But you also have lenders who require certain things. Sometimes they don't understand what they should be testing for. And so it really comes back to, if I'm buying a property, I'm going to make sure I understand what I want to test for to make sure that I'm safe, my family's safe, and that it's not going to affect my property values. So going back to the HUD rules, HUD put out a new document. It's called HUD 4000.1, I think. And it says a mortgagee must confirm that a connection is made to the public community water system whenever feasible and available at reasonable cost. So their rules now say that if you're near a public water supply connection, that's the first thing you have to do is you have to get off your private well and go on to city water. And what's reasonable? You can define that a lot of ways. I know our public water supply here in Champaign-Urbana just ran water lines out near the airport for a couple subdivisions. And if someone lives across the street, is that close enough? It's still, I say that because that's a good example. Some friends of ours bought a property across the street from one of these subdivisions in the country, and they sampled their well, and it had arsenic at 75 ppb. So they contacted the city to see if they could run a line and what it would cost. And I don't know what the cost ended up being, but they made the decision that rather than deal with treatment for the rest of their lives at this property with a private well, they ran a line into the road and connected to city water so that they know their water is being sampled regularly. It's being managed by a professional. They always have water pressure. They don't have to deal with any of those issues. And so, that may vary from place to place. It's kind of a vague way to put things in, but the bottom line is if you're near a public water system, you need to consider having a well or having connecting. So the other part of this is, here's what it says in the new rules. When an individual water supply system is present, the mortgagee must ensure that the water quality meets the requirements of the health authority with jurisdiction. If there are no local or state water quality standards, then water quality must meet the standards set by EPA as presented in the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations, which is the Safe Drinking Water Act. So what this says is if you're in a state where they don't really have set rules after a well's been constructed, so there's no rule that says you have to test, either locally, county, or state, then this says to get a HUD loan, a VA loan or FHA loan, you have to sample for everything in the Safe Drinking Water Act. That would cost several $1,000s to do, just letting you know. And that is the current rule. So what's happened, these rules have evolved and changed, and like when you talk to HUD, this 4000.1 is a living document. It changes all the time. But what's happened in the meantime is that some folks have found other information and are using that and using it incorrectly. So for example, this happened a couple years ago. I put this slide up. We'd found this, or someone had given it to us saying, here's what HUD requires. They require lead, nitrate, nitrite, total nitrate, nitrite, coliform, and fecal coliform. And it looks great. It was on this nice PDF, and it said, here's HUD's rules. And we put it out there, and then I went to find it after the fact, and I couldn't find it. Well, eventually I did find it on a mortgage company's website in Michigan. And they'd taken an old law from 1994, put it on a brand new spanking PDF that looked really nice, that said, here's what HUD requires. And it's just not true. That it was from a mortgagee letter that had been superseded in like 1998 or 2001. So it hasn't been the law from HUD or the rules for HUD for almost 15 years then, and yet this was being passed around as, oh, this is all you need to test for. So that isn't. It's wrong. And if you've seen this before or used it, that's a risk, right? Because those are not the HUD rules. The HUD rules say you have to follow local jurisdiction. And the problem with that is that in areas like Massachusetts, you could have a jurisdiction that says, one health district says we only have to sample for coliform and nitrate, and the folks in the next health district over across the road, literally, may say you have to test for 7 or 12 things, and somebody else may have no rules. And the state of Massachusetts doesn't have rules for testing. So it's, as a realtor, it's a struggle for you, I'm sure. Depending on how big your area covers, in an area like Massachusetts where some of those health districts are really small, you may have to deal with rules in each one that are completely separate. Some are required, some are recommended, all those sorts of things. So something needs to be done to standardize these things in order to both adequately protect everyone. So the problem we have, or I have with this, is you're being overly protected in one area, and in another area you're not being protected at all. And it really shouldn't be that way. If we're going to pass any laws or rules that require testing, they need to be consistent so that everyone gets equal health protection under the law. And that's kind of my message in all this. So, and that's another reason why it's worth the money to go ahead and sample for more than is required, if the requirements really aren't up to snuff with what they should be. So so one of the questions we got was, can you provide an example of the wording of a county ordinance for requiring water testing upon real estate transfer? We don't deal with the laws like that typically because we are not a regulator. We're a research agency of the state. But I just Googled private well. First, I just Googled private well testing ordinance, and I found this first one from Westchester County, New York. And this is just one paragraph out of their testing law, but it basically says at the sale of property transfer, you have to test for certain things. And the next two, I'd added at property transfer and found this section 9. It was from a county in New Jersey, and the one below that, the 6.4, is an excerpt from a law that was passed in 2016 by a county in Indiana requiring those things. So again, there's a lot of ordinances that are being developed at a local scale because there's no national or a lot of times state standard, and people want to do something about that, especially where they know, like in the Indiana situation, they know they have a lot of arsenic in their groundwater. So they decided that it was important to protect people buying homes that might be drinking that arsenic. So they decided to create a county ordinance that required testing, and they added these other things that are relevant to them. And so everyone's a little different, and some of them, like the one from Westchester County was 1 page long. The other two are 6 to 10 pages long. And I do know that the National Environmental Health Association has done some work looking at the regulations at local, state, and a national scale related to wells. And I didn't get a chance to reach out to them, but if you're interested, you can email me, and we can try to talk to them about what might be available and what they found are some model ordinances. And I know in September of 2016, I was out at a conference that was in Connecticut, and there were folks from Massachusetts and Connecticut there, and I met several local health department sanitarians who were working on ordinances for their area, and they were based on others that already existed. So they're out there, and we can probably help find more of those. And I did download these 3, and I can send them to whoever would like to have them. But it really depends on where you're at in the country. The New Jersey one, the county created a stricter ordinance, if you will, but New Jersey already requires every well in the state for property transfer to be sampled. So they just put some extra caveats on that, I believe. About getting your well, there's also a lot of questions about getting your water analyzed or tested. Every state accredits labs, so there's a certification list for each state. And so it just depends on where you're at. And I mentioned here, probably to confuse the issue, that New Jersey, their state lab does all their testing at property transfer for a wide range of things, 40 or 50 constituents, I believe, where in Illinois, you can request a water sample from the state lab, and they only do coliform testing. So if you want everything else done, it has to be done at a private lab. But if you're, as a best practice, I need to recommend to everyone, not knowing where you live, that you use an accredited certified lab, because that assures that they've met a lot of requirements for how they run their tests, that they use the right methods, that they're doing all the background work, blanks, duplicates, and all that stuff. But I do want to again mention, like, our lab is, well accepted in the state of Illinois anyway. We're not certified anymore. We were, but being certified requires a lot of paperwork and manpower that we couldn't maintain. And so we've lost our certification, but we do follow all of the EPA methods and do all the work the same way. It's just we're not certified. So a lot of times, check out the lab if you're not going to use a certified lab. But getting back to the point here, your best bet in general is just EPA has a webpage. If you just Google certification of laboratories for drinking water, you'll get this page, the EPA website. If you scroll down this page, you'll see this map that says state certification programs and certified labs. Every state has a list of labs that are certified for their state. They're not all in their state, but they're certified to do analysis by their state. And that's because every community water supply has to test their water because of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So all of these labs test community water supplies. Not all of them will do private well samples. You have to call them and find out. But you can either click on the scroll down or the drop down to see the state list, or you can click on a state. I clicked on North Carolina, and it took me to this page. You can see the second box there is drinking water program, and at the very bottom end of that it says, or a list of certified labs. So when I clicked on that to look at the list of certified labs in North Carolina, I got this search box. If you know what you want to sample for, you can start checking boxes, and this thing goes down. This is about half of the stuff that's listed there. And then you hit return, and it'll tell you which labs do each of those things. Or you can just click on view list of all laboratories that are in their list up there at the top. And when you do that, you get a list you can see here. And this is only about half of the labs that were listed. Many of them are in North Carolina, but certainly not all of them. And they're in about 20 states in the end. And a lot of times you can ship your samples to a lab in another state, and they've went to the trouble of being certified in a bunch of states so that they can actually do testing around the country and that sort of information. So that's one way. That's what I would recommend in general, to find a certified lab for the things you're after. And again, that drop-down list a minute ago was just for North Carolina. That's what they've done. Every state does this a little differently. As far as well disinfection, I do want to talk about that really quickly. So the question we got for this webinar was, what is the correct way to sterilize a well for bacteria and coliform? There are a lot of different sets of information out there. I know Connecticut just created a nice 6-page document on how to disinfect a well. The one that we recommend is from Minnesota Department of Health. It's this document here. It's well and water system disinfection for private wells. And there's things you should know. When someone tells you to just pour bleach down the well, that's a bad idea. It's supposed to be mixed first. You don't just pour straight bleach into a well. It can release a lot of metals. It can also be harmful to any kind of seals or rubber seals and things like that, like on your pitless. And so Minnesota has done a really good job of creating a useful guide that walks you through step by step. And it's got pictures and diagrams and tells you how to mix it up first, so you put in the right concentration in the well, how to calculate all those things. You do need to know your well information, and then how to go about the process of actually disinfecting everything. When you disinfect a well, you have to get chlorinated water in the well and then turn on all the faucets in your house, flush every toilet, turn on every shower, every one of them until you smell chlorine, and then you turn them off and you leave them set overnight. That way you're assured that every pipe in your home is had chlorinated water in it, and it's sitting there killing any kind of bacteria that might be in there. And that's the proper way, and a lot of folks don't go to that trouble, and then they wonder why they have bacteria problems. And this is the best guide that we've found that's out there, but there's a lot of discussion in the private well community, and especially in the research community, about some issues that aren't dealt with in some of these rules or in some of these guidelines. One is the pH of the water. I was just at a talk at the National Groundwater Association meeting where a company talked about how effective chlorine is at different pHs, and it turns out that after a certain pH, around 8.5, I believe, it may not be as effective. And so you have to use more, or you get to a certain pH and it's not effective at all. And, we're looking into that because there are approaches that some folks use. We've heard of using vinegar to lower the pH. Bleach naturally increases the pH of the water when you use it. So if you're close to one of those numbers, you might need to use something to lower it first. Our best advice today is to follow this approach, and it does not mention using anything to lower the pH or raise the pH, but there are certain instances where chlorine will either be less effective or might not be helpful. And so that's something to look at. If you've chlorinated a well and disinfected it and you still have bacteria problems, it might be worth then looking into what the pH of the water is and some of those things. And that's our best advice, at least today. And, there's a lot of folks working on private well issues on the research side, like Virginia Tech, and they've raised some of these issues in the past, and we're hopeful they're going to come up with some better guidelines down the road related to that issue specifically. And this is just further down the page. It even tells you what to do with your equipment. And, WQA is the Water Quality Association, and it's really about, if you do have any kind of treatment, what to do with that before you chlorinate so you're not fouling some of those devices that may be pretty expensive. The question about radon. Do you come across radon in well water, and should you test for it? That's actually, I combined two questions. My boss sent this link from CDC, and all you have to do is Google radon in drinking water in private wells, and this is the first link that comes up. But if you're in an area where there's known to be radon, and again, a lot of times it's associated with either granite, rock, or the gravel that's formed from granite minerals, then what CDC's website says, which is right here, is that while most radon-related deaths are due to radon gas accumulated in houses, 300 to 1,800 deaths per year are attributed to radon from household water. That was alarming to me, to be honest. And so, again, this web page is available from CDC. I suggest you look at it. What's interesting here is you can't test for radon like you would a normal water sample. It's really a more involved process. Only some labs actually test for it. I know my boss again, Walt Kelly, is a water quality specialist, and he's done some radon testing in Illinois. And you have to submerge basically your sample bottle in the water that's coming out of the tap with a hose, so that there's no air at all in the line. And it's actually quite a process, and requires it might require someone to do the testing for you. But yeah, I did want to address that because when I started looking into this, it is an issue. And the last question we had, which I somehow missed, that I already answered it in the text of the webinar, so I'm going to skip over the next couple things, but it was about, do separate abandoned private wells need to be professionally decommissioned? If so, how is this regulated? Well, most states have rules that say you do have to, you're supposed to properly abandon and seal a well that's unused. But enforcement really varies, and in most states it's not enforced at all, just because the states don't have the bandwidth. Some states have programs where they'll help pay for or cost share abandoning a well, but as a realtor, the bottom line is they're a safety hazard, they're a source of contamination, and they are a legal responsibility if someone falls in and gets hurt or killed, which I showed before. And so the best thing to do is to have that well sealed before you try to sell a property. And if you're the buyer and there's an abandoned well, make it a condition of the sale, because you don't want to have to deal with it or take that risk. Anyone can wander on a property and fall in, and you could lose your home for it. So, and as I said, I apologize. I didn't realize I put the abandoned part of this in the early part of the talk, so I included this again here. But that's the questions that I have answered for today, and I already apologized to Dan that there weren't really any that were under in his bandwidth, so to speak, or could have, I guess, chimed in anytime you wanted to, Dan, about the radon and that stuff.
Yeah, no problem at all, Steve. You handled it great.
I need to check. Somehow this thing's taken over both of my screens. And it looks like we don't have any questions. So I'm going to pull this over and make it full screen. And so, yeah, if anybody has any follow-up questions, please let us know. And, the URL is info@privatewellclass.org. And if anyone wants CE information for NEHA attendance, that information's there. So I appreciate your time, and Dan, I certainly appreciate your time today. Yeah, I wasn't thinking, I guess.
No, sounded great, Steve.
Thanks for attending, and everyone have a happy holiday.